Thank you for joining me today, which is Thursday, June 11th. I'd like to say a very happy birthday to my youngest daughter, Maggie, who turns 12 years old today. So happy birthday, Maggie. Maggie's been giving us her birthday list for several weeks now, and it gets getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we'll see what kind of birthday she has. But happy birthday, Maggie. You are amazing, and I love you so very much. So chapter 12, we move on to what becomes a section with Jesus being in confrontation with the leaders of the religious establishment. Often Matthew refers to them as the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. Basically, these are the religious elites who ran the temple, ran the synagogues. They had certain ways they did things, and they didn't want anyone to challenge what they did. They loved their rituals, and they loved making sure everybody knew they carried out their rituals, and they also imposed upon everybody those rituals that had to be obeyed. And in a sense, they had gotten so caught up in the ritual that they had forgotten what the ritual represented. They'd gotten so accustomed to keeping the law, they forgot what the law represented. Now the law, this is the law of Moses, it's typically how it's referred to, was meant to be a place where sinful humanity and a holy God could coexist. So the law, in its essence, is a really good thing because it gives space for a construct for God to be in a relationship with human beings. But like we so often do, we as human beings can find a way to make anything into an idol. We can even make the Bible into an idol. We can make family into an idol. Basically, what are you worshiping? And I would contend, and I think Jesus would contend in his time, that they had made the law an idol, and following the law became their religion, not necessarily connecting with the God who gave them the law in the first place. And so, for example, let's look at chapter 12, verse 1. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. Again, the Sabbath. The Sabbath was to be kept holy. This is, of course, established in Genesis, but it's specifically in the law of Moses and the Ten Commandments. And so the idea is that you didn't do anything on the Sabbath. You rested. It had gotten to the point where that meant you couldn't do anything. That you basically just stayed still. And there were rules about what you could eat, how much you could eat, how you could make a meal, what you could do. And we can get caught up in our own ideas of what religion is. I remember when I was an associate pastor at a kind of a big steeple church in a mid-sized town. Someone came to me, I think it was the second Sunday I was there, and he was really upset. He's like, I just need to talk to you. And I'm like, okay, have I already messed something up? And it was only like my second Sunday. And he goes, I just want to point out something that's very disturbing to me. And he goes, I've been noticing that our young men, when they come to church, they're wearing their jackets, but they're not wearing their ties. And I just think that's so disrespectful. Why would you come to church and not put on a jacket and tie? Okay, I mean, and of course this was 1996, and the expectation was for me to wear a coat and tie every day that I was at work. And I couldn't help but think, is that what church is for you? That people dress appropriately? And for him, appropriately meant a jacket and tie. It seems a little bit absurd looking back on it 24 years later, but that was a big deal to him. That was an issue to him. Well, other people have all kinds of sensibilities about that, about what's appropriate to wear to church and what's not. I remember when we went to a church and figured out we could wear blue jeans. My brothers and I thought that was the biggest deal and the greatest thing ever. But certainly couldn't wear shorts. Unless it was Vacation Bible School, then you could wear shorts. So, we look at the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, and we point fingers at them and go, how silly the way you obeyed those rules. But we tend to do it ourselves in some ways. And so the Sabbath, Jesus, he shouldn't have been traveling on the Sabbath, but he was going through grain fields. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and eat. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. In other words, wow, we got you. Busted. You're breaking the law. And I imagine Jesus just takes a deep sigh when he says, have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? This is, of course, King David when he's being pursued. This is before he's king, I'm pretty sure. And he's being pursued by Saul, and they go into a place of worship and they go into the house of God and ate the bread of the presence that only the priests were allowed to eat because they had to survive. So he entered the house, this is David, the house of God, and ate the bread of the presence, which was not lawful for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priest. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Oh, that would have really set them off. He's basically saying, look, remember earlier when Jesus calls out the hypocrites? He's basically saying, you bunch of hypocrites, you don't have a clue what the Sabbath is for. You yourselves break the Sabbath. What is wrong with you? And so he's not winning any friends among the religious elites, I can tell you that much. And then to say, I tell you something greater than the temple is here. The temple had become the seat of power, the seat of hope. This is the temple that was rebuilt when they came back from exile. It was kind of a pretty low rent structure, but Herod the Great, and he was known as the Great because he was a builder, began building this massive temple complex that had become this amazing wonder of the world. And it's big and it's imposing and it's magnificent. And Jesus is saying, you think that's a big deal? Something greater than the temple is here. And they're like, what? And of course, Jesus is talking about himself. He is the Beth-El. Beth-El, it means house of the Lord. Within Jesus is where the Lord resides. And they can't get it through their head. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. He's like, I'm Lord over the Sabbath. I've often bumped into this every now and then. People are like, well, you can't do this or that. It's Sunday. And I'm like, I work every Sunday pretty much. I take Sabbath. Right? It doesn't have to be on Sunday for me. I take Sabbath time to rest, to reflect, to pray. That's Sabbath is important. Don't deny yourself the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is the time for you to intentionally pay attention to what God is doing in the world. And part of the reason why we need to take Sabbath is so that we can relearn that God can run the world without us, without our attention, without our checking our emails, without us keeping our hands on the wheel so tightly, that we can learn that God is in control and God's got this. That's part of what it means to take Sabbath, and to trust that God can do it. And also we need rest. We just need rest. We're better when we have the proper rest. So 12:9, he left that place and entered their synagogue, right, a place of worship. A man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? Of course, they're doing everything they can to trap him. And so here's a guy with a hand that's not right, and he's like, and they point to him, like they don't show any compassion for this guy, do they? They don't say, oh, there's poor Joe, you care about him? And it's like, oh, by the way, there's some guy over here with a withered hand. Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? And so they did that so they might accuse him. He said to them, and this is a wonderful question, suppose one of you has only one sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not lay hold of it and lift it out? Because within the law, within all those rules and regulations, you were permitted to pull your ox out of the ditch on the Sabbath if it were in distress, right? So it's like a little addendum that was within the law. I had a farmer in one church who many times after a service on Sunday morning, he'd walk out, he'd just kind of look at me and goes, well, I got an ox in the ditch, which meant I'm going to work, right? That's because he had an ox in the ditch. He had crops in the field. Well, Jesus uses the image of a sheep here. And then he asks them this. Yeah, and the answer is they know the answer. Of course they would, if they had one sheep, of course they would get it out of the ditch because they wouldn't want to lose the value of it. How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep, right? And that's what Jesus asked. How much more valuable is this man than your sheep? You'll get this sheep out of trouble, but you're going to let this human being, this man, this child of God, continue in his suffering. Then he said to them, okay, so he goes on, this is 12. How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and it was restored, as sound as the other. You would think that the Pharisees would celebrate this amazing gift of God, an act of power in their very presence, that this man who was suffered his entire life now is restored. That's worthy of celebration. But no, that's not the way they go. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him on how to destroy him. This is a big deal. I mean, we encounter the Pharisees being in direct opposition to Jesus at this point. Not only are they speaking up against him, but they've kind of this is a bit of a tipping point. They're actively looking for ways to end his life, to destroy him, to get rid of him, to stop him, that this person who is challenging their authority, their power, their control, their livelihood. They are threatened by Jesus and his teachings. They're threatened by his demonstrations of power. Instead of saying, wow, thank you, Lord, you are finally here and on site, that becomes a threat to their power and their authority. And that's a big deal, right? When our power, when our authority gets threatened, do we look to God? Or do we automatically get defensive? It's interesting. Jesus is going to dismantle this system of religious really oppression, and they don't want that to happen because they're the ones who are at the top of the pyramid, and they like their position at the top of the pyramid, and they discern in Jesus a threat to their culture. I didn't say to God's culture, but to their culture. And so next week we'll take up with Matthew 12, verse 15 and following. So hope you will join me then. Thank you.